This is the story of Marcus Allen Holt and his wife, Elena Simone Holt. They had built something that looked from the outside like the kind of marriage people point to at dinner parties. Stable, warm, occasionally funny, anchored by a shared mortgage and a shared dog and 12 years of accumulated memory. But a marriage is not what it looks like from the outside, and both Marcus and Elena understood this in the wordless way that people understand things they have chosen not to say aloud. There was love between them, real love. The weathered kind, but there was also a particular silence that had been growing for years, spreading like a slow leak beneath tile, invisible until the floor gives way. Marcus worked. Elena waited. Neither of them had ever fully articulated what they were waiting for. That silence, and what grew in it, is what this story is about. The dog heard the car first. Biscuit, a 10-year-old beagle with a graying muzzle, and the unhurried dignity of an animal who had outlasted several versions of the household, lifted his head from the kitchen mat and turned one ear toward the garage door. Marcus heard it too. The low groan of the mechanism, the familiar percussion of the door settling into its track. He stood at the island with his second cup of coffee going cold, reading nothing in particular on his phone, waiting in the way he had learned to wait, without expectation, without performance. Elena came through the door carrying dry cleaning in one hand and a paper grocery bag in the other, her coat still buttoned against the November air. She moved through the kitchen with the practiced efficiency of someone who had memorized the choreography of a space so completely that she no longer needed to think about it. Traffic was bad on Clement, she said. Not to him exactly, to the room. It usually is on Thursdays, Marcus said. She set the groceries down and began unpacking. He watched her, not critically, not warmly, just watched, the way you look at something so familiar it has become almost transparent. She was still beautiful. He knew this. The way he knew the square footage of their house, as a fact that had ceased to produce feeling. They had been married 12 years, together for 14. They had no children, which had been a mutual decision arrived at separately, never fully discussed, ratified finally by the simple passage of time. They had the dog. They had the house in the Richmond district with its bay windows and its ancient radiators that clanked through the night. They had careers that gave them enough money to be comfortable and enough busyness to avoid long stretches of unstructured time together. They had, Marcus sometimes thought, everything a marriage needed except the one thing he could no longer quite name. Victor called the office today, Elena said. She was folding a reusable bag into a neat square, not looking at him. There's a problem with the Castellan account. He said it might need some weekend attention. Marcus set his phone face down on the counter. That's the third time this month. These things happen. Victor Ashby had been Marcus's company secretary, or rather, the administrative coordinator for Holt Meridian Consulting for 2.5 years. He was 34, pleasant in the way that well-trained people are pleasant, competent enough that Marcus had stopped noticing him specifically and started simply relying on him abstractly. He had thin hands and careful posture and a habit of pausing before he spoke, as if composing sentences in advance. Marcus had found this quality professional. He had never once found it troubling. Elena poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter on the far side of the island. There was 6 feet of marble between them. 6 feet and 12 years. "How was your day?" she asked. "Fine," he said. "Long." This was true. Marcus's days were almost always long. He ran a mid-sized consulting firm that specialized in corporate restructuring, which meant that he spent his hours in rooms full of people who were frightened of losing things, and his job was to help them figure out which losses they could survive. He was good at this. He had a talent for identifying what was essential and what was expendable, for separating the structural from the cosmetic, for seeing through the performance of stability to the thing actually holding it up. He applied this talent at work every day with precision and confidence. He did not apply it at home. That evening they ate dinner the way they usually did at the table, with the television off, talking about things that were not quite real, a neighbor's renovation, a podcast Elena had listened to, a statistic Marcus had read about commercial real estate. The conversation moved with the ease of long practice, and if you had watched them from the outside, you might have called it companionable. You might even have called it loving. After dinner, Marcus washed the dishes, and Elena fed the dog. She said goodnight at 10:15 and he stayed up another hour, not watching anything, sitting in the particular quality of quiet that their house produced late at night. A quiet that felt, in some way he had never articulated, like the audible version of something missing. He turned off the lights room by room. Biscuit followed him up the stairs. Elena was already asleep, or appeared to be, facing the window with the covers pulled up to her shoulder. Marcus undressed in the dark without turning on the lamp. He had learned years ago that she was a light sleeper. He had learned it and adjusted and never complained. And somewhere in that small accommodation, in the 10,000 small accommodations of a long marriage, the consideration had curdled so gradually into resentment that he hadn't noticed the poem, transformation, until it was complete. He lay in the dark and listened to her breathe. He thought, I don't know when we stopped being interesting to each other. Then, because this thought had nowhere useful to go, he let it dissolve, and eventually he slept. 3 weeks later, Victor Ashby attended their dinner party. Elena had organized. She organized most social things, which was another form of invisible labor Marcus had come to rely on without examining. 8 people around the long dining table, 2 couples they'd known for years, a woman from Elena's ceramics class, her husband, and Victor, who arrived precisely on time with a bottle of Burgundy that cost more than Marcus would have expected a company coordinator to spend. He noticed this, and then let himself not notice it. Victor was good at dinner parties. He asked questions and listened to the answers with an attention that felt, to the people receiving it, like a form of intimacy. He laughed in the right places. He deferred to Marcus twice in conversation, once on a point about corporate tax structure, once about a neighborhood in Chicago they had both apparently passed through, and both times he did it with the ease of someone who was not diminishing himself to do so. Elena refreshed his wine glass without being asked. Marcus watched this from across the table. He held the image for a moment, her hand, the bottle, the small downward tilt of her head as she poured, and then he released it, filed it somewhere he wouldn't look. Later, after the guests had gone and they were moving through the cleanup in their wordless domestic synchrony, Elena said, Victor's good company. I'm glad I invited him. You invited him? You don't mind, do you? He seems lonely. I don't mind, Marcus said, and this was true. He did not yet mind. What he felt instead was something smaller and harder to name, a faint displacement, like furniture rearranged by centimeters. Enough that you keep reaching for things that aren't quite where you expect them. The weeks that followed had a texture Marcus would later describe to no one, because he had no one he described things to. He worked, he came home. Elena was sometimes there and sometimes not. Ceramics on Tuesdays, her book group on alternating Thursdays, occasional evenings that were explained vaguely and which Marcus did not press. He did not press because pressing felt, to him, like a kind of desperation, and Marcus Holt did not permit himself to be desperate. This was one of his flaws, though he would not have called it that. He would have called it self-sufficiency. One evening in late November, he came home early, a cancelled meeting, a reprieve he hadn't expected, and found Elena on the phone in the kitchen, her back to the door. She was laughing in a way he recognized but could not immediately place. And then he could. It was the laugh she used when she was performing relaxation, performing ease, which was different from the real version. The real version came out lower, slightly caught, surprised by itself. She heard him and turned. I'll call you back, she said into the phone and set it face down on the counter. Who was that? Diane, she said, from ceramics. He nodded. He hung up his coat. He went to the refrigerator and stood in its cold light looking at nothing. He did not know yet that he was beginning to know. He said one evening during a rare stretch of genuine quiet, the two of them in the living room with books neither of them was really reading, do you remember when we used to drive to the coast on Sundays? Elena looked up. What made you think of that? I don't know. I don't know. He paused. Maybe, he stopped again, and something strange and brief crossed his face. A flicker of self-consciousness, as if he'd suddenly become aware of being observed. Maybe like the story, or subscribe or something, he said quietly, almost to himself. The words landed oddly. Wrong rhythm, wrong register. Elena stared at him. What? Nothing. He shook his head. I don't know why I said that. A pause. She returned to her book. The silence resumed, heavier than before, as though something had passed through the room that neither of them could identify and neither of them would mention. We should drive to the coast again sometime, she said finally. Yes, he said. They didn't. It was the duplicate key that first arranged itself into meaning. He found it in February, in the ceramic bowl by the front door where they both kept their keysible Elena had made in her class. Earthy green with an uneven rim that he had always found beautiful for its imperfection. He was looking for a specific key to his storage unit, and he moved the pile aside methodically, and there it was, a brass house key. Standard cut, no identifying tag. He turned it over in his palm. Their house had been rekeyed 4 years ago. Marcus had 2 copies. Helena had 2 copies. He knew this because he had handled the rekeying himself, paid for it, designated the copies. He was precise about these things. This was a 3rd copy. He set it back in the bowl. He found his storage key. He left for his errand and drove for 20 minutes before he realized he had passed the storage facility 6 blocks back and had no memory of the last 20 minutes of driving at all. He did not confront her that day or the next. Marcus Holt did not make accusations without evidence, and more than that, he did not make them without preparation. He had spent his career learning that the moment you present your position matters as much as the position itself. Timing is architecture. He understood this in his bones, but he also knew, somewhere quieter and less professional, that he was afraid, not of what she'd done, of what she'd confirming it would require him to do next. He spent 2 weeks looking at things he had trained himself not to look at. The call logs on the shared family plan, the slight but consistent inventory of her scheduled Tuesday evenings that started at 6 and ended at 9, which was an hour longer than ceramics. The way she had begun sleeping on her side of the bed, as though there were a wall between them, not hostile, just final, like someone who had made a private decision and was waiting for the world to catch up. The fact that Victor Ashby had, in the past 6 weeks, stopped making eye contact with Marcus at work in the specific way that people stop making eye contact when eye contact has become dangerous. He thought about the burgundy. He thought about the key. He thought about the laugh. He did not think about what he himself had or had not given her, because that line of thought led somewhere he was not yet willing to go. He came home on a Wednesday in March to find Victor Ashby in his living room. Not visiting, not sitting, unpacking. There was a medium-sized duffel bag open on the floor near the armchair, and Victor was removing items from it with the focused, methodical care of someone who had done this before, or had planned to do this for a long time. Elena stood near the hallway entrance. She was holding a mug in both hands, though it appeared to be empty. Victor looked up. His face did a complicated thing. Not guilt, exactly, but the rearrangement that happens when a plan meets reality sooner than scheduled. Marcus, Elena said. Her voice was level. She had prepared for this moment, he could tell. She had scripted the leveling of her voice. He looked at the bag. He looked at Victor. He looked at her. He set his keys and the bowl noted the 3rd key still there, unmoved, now grotesque in its implication, and sat down in the chair across the room with the deliberate calm of a man choosing, very consciously, not to perform what he felt. Tell me, he said. Elena sat down. Victor remained standing, which Marcus noted. A man who did not yet know whether to stay or go. Good, he thought. Stay uncertain. Elena explained, temporary. Victor was between leases, a building situation, a landlord dispute, a few weeks at most. She'd offered because it was the right thing to do. She used the word temporary 3 times in 4 sentences. Marcus listened. He noticed the cleared space in the coat closet, visible from where he sat, her coats consolidated to one side. 3 empty hangers where there had been none this morning. He noticed the small carved wooden object on the windowsill that was not his and had not been there yesterday. How long? He said. I just told you. How long, he said. Have you been in love with him? The room went quiet in a specific way, not the absence of sound, but the presence of held breath. Elena looked at her empty mug. Marcus, you don't have to be dramatic about it, he said. I'm not asking for drama. I'm asking for an honest answer, which I recognize might be a new experience for this conversation. Victor said, I should give you two. Please stay, Marcus said. His voice was pleasant. It was the most frightening thing about it. I'd like everyone present. He looked at Elena. She met his eyes for the first time in the conversation, and what he found there was not quite guilt, and not quite love, and not quite grief. It was something more ordinary than all of those, more human. Relief. She looked like a person who had been holding something very heavy for a very long time and had finally, against her own best judgment, set it down. Yes, she said quietly. I'm sorry. He nodded once. Thank you. He stood, retrieved his laptop bag from near the door, and went upstairs. He sat on the edge of the bed in the room that still smelled like both of them, and opened his computer and spent the next 2 hours doing very specific things, transferring funds from joint accounts into a personal account he had opened 6 days ago. When he had begun to understand that preparation was already overdue, canceling utilities in his name and converting them to no name, making a call to his attorney that he had been composing in his head for 2 weeks. He worked with the focus of someone who had replaced grief with purpose, understanding that grief would still be there afterward, and that the afterward was where he would have to live. Biscuit sat at his feet throughout, patient, ancient, without judgment. When the work was done, Marcus packed a bag, not a dramatic bag, not a statement bag, just enough for a week, which he suspected would become longer. He carried it downstairs, paused in the living room doorway. Elena and Victor were in the kitchen. He could hear low voices, not intimate exactly, but private. He did not announce his departure. He put on his coat. He took Biscuit's leash from the hook. Biscuit had materialized instantly, hopefully, at the sound, and he walked out the front door into the cold March night and got into his car. He sat there for a while with the dog in the passenger seat, the engine running, not yet driving. Then he drove. Summer arrived the way it does in San Francisco, late and gray and misunderstood by everyone who had expected it to be warm. Marcus was living in a furnished apartment in the Dogpatch neighborhood. 2 bedrooms, clean lines, almost no personality. He had not decorated it. He had told himself this was because he was in transition. After 4 months, he was still in transition. The apartment still had the feeling of an airport layover, functional, impermanent. Nobody's idea of a home. He worked more than ever, which was not a conscious strategy, but which served as one. Holt Meridian had 3 significant contracts in Q2, and Marcus had personally overseen negotiations on 2 of them. His CFO, a careful, dry woman named Patricia, who had been with the company 8 years, had mentioned twice, with her particular form of delicacy, that the Castellan accounts seemed to have some irregularities worth examining. He had told her he was looking into it. He was looking into it. Elena, for her part, had made the story into something livable. She did this the way people do incrementally, with internal revisions so subtle they are imperceptible to the reviser. By April, the story was Marcus had been emotionally absent for years, and she had found in Victor something she had not realized she was missing, and the situation had become complicated. But these things happen and no one is the villain. By June, the story was Marcus had known something was wrong and had chosen never to address it, which was itself a choice, and she could not be held solely responsible for the consequences of his avoidance. By August, the story was almost clean, almost bearable, with just a few rough edges she didn't press on. Victor had moved in officially. He was, as it turned out, a surprisingly domestic person. He cooked. He cleaned with some regularity. He was affectionate in the low-key, undemanding way that Elena had once told a friend years ago was the thing she most needed in a partner. She had made this confession, and Marcus, if she had told him, would have tried to become that thing, which would have been its own problem. She had not told him. There were moments, in the early mornings before Victor was awake and the house had its own quality of light and quiet, when Elena felt something she did not have a name for. Not regret, exactly, not longing. Something smaller, the awareness of a door that had closed, not violently but finally, and on the other side of it a version of her life she had inhabited for 12 years and could no longer access. She did not grieve it loudly. She allowed herself 30 seconds, perhaps, of looking at that closed door, and then she made coffee, and the day began. She was a person who had always been better at continuing than at stopping to examine. Marcus, in his impersonal apartment, was changing in ways he had not predicted and could not have planned. He had started running. Not because he believed in the cathartic properties of running, he was skeptical of the literature on that, but because his body required somewhere to put the energy that conversation and connection had previously absorbed. He ran along the waterfront in the early mornings, Biscuit struggling damely alongside him until the dog's dignity demanded a slower pace, and Marcus would slow, and they would walk, and he would think. He thought about the shape of the last 12 years. Not obsessively. He was not an obsessive person, but with the careful, unsparing attention he applied to balance sheets and structural assessments. He thought about the ways he had retreated into competence as a substitute for presence. He thought about how he had confused providing for someone with loving them, how he had confused stability with warmth, how he had understood Elena's hunger for intimacy as a need he could satisfy by simply remaining by being, reliably, there without understanding that there was not enough if there meant withheld. He was not flagellating himself. He had no interest in self-flagellation, which he considered unproductive. But he was being honest, and honesty, when you have avoided it for long enough, has a physical quality, almost like hunger. He thought, I loved her. I still love the marriage we might have been. He thought those are not the same thing. He thought with something that surprised him by feeling almost like peace, I can live with the distinction. In late September, Patricia placed a folder on his desk. She sat across from him with the expression she wore when the news required absorption time before response. He opened the folder. He read the first 3 pages. He set the folder down. How long? He said. Best estimate, 14 months, Patricia said. Possibly longer. The Castellan account was the primary vehicle, but there are indicators in 2 others. The structure was, she paused. It was well designed, not amateur. Marcus was quiet for a time. Through the window of his office, the bay was flat and silver and indifferent. Victor Ashby, he said. Not a question. He had access to the account structures. The signatures, I know what he had access to. He closed the folder. Get me Brennan, his attorney. Get me the fraud unit contact at the AG's office. And get me, he stopped. Reconsidered. Get me a list of every transaction on the Castellan account for the past 18 months. Physical copies. And I need them today. Patricia nodded. She stood to leave. Patricia. She turned. Did Elena? He stopped again for a long time. Is there any evidence that she— No, Patricia said carefully. Nothing direct. He nodded. He looked at his hands. He looked at the window. Thank you, he said. Close the door. He sat alone in his office for a very long time. He called her on an October morning. Not a dramatic morning. Low fog, the radio on a news station he wasn't listening to. Biscuit asleep across his feet in the way the dog had learned to position himself an anchor. Unwitting, devoted. Marcus had the number up on his phone for a full 10 minutes before he pressed call. He had not spoken to Elena since March. 7 months. The longest they had been without speaking in 14 years. She answered on the 3rd ring. Marcus. Her voice was careful. Not cold, not warm. Prepared in the way that people prepare themselves for conversations they have rehearsed. Elena, he said. I need to see you, not at the house. He paused. There's a cafe on 9th and Irving, Tuesday at 10. I need you to come without Victor. A silence. Is this about the divorce? She said. It's about other things, he said. The divorce attorney can handle the divorce. This is about something else. She agreed in the flat, pragmatic way of a person who had already grieved the version of this conversation that would have been different. and had made her peace with what remained. The cafe was small and warm and smelled like bread. Marcus arrived first. He ordered coffee and sat by the window and watched the street. He felt calm in the way that follows a long period of significant turbulence, not empty, but settled, like the inside of a storm's eye, or the aftermath of a very long cry. He had done what needed doing over the past 6 weeks. The conversations with the attorney, the depositions, the careful, methodical assembly of documentation that Patricia had begun and Marcus had completed. He had not made any of it personal, which was harder than he had expected because it was, in every way, personal. Elena arrived at 3 minutes past 10. She had her hands deep in her coat pockets, and she looked, and this caught him somewhere unguarded, tired. Not haggard, not devastated, but tired in the settled way of someone who had been carrying something for longer than they admitted. She sat down across from him. They looked at each other for a moment. 14 years, 12 of them married. The dog, the house in the Richmond, the coast drives they had stopped taking. The ceramic bowl by the door. "You look well," she said. "I'm all right," he said. This was true. She ordered tea. They sat with the small buffer of silence that had become, for them, a kind of native language. "Victor is being investigated," Marcus said, formally. "The state AG's office and 2 federal agencies have open cases. He has been systematically defrauding the Castellan account and, to a lesser extent, 2 others for approximately 14 to 18 months. The methodology was sophisticated. He knew the architecture of the accounts because he had unrestricted administrative access." He paused. "Because I trusted him." Elena's face had gone still, not the stillness of shock. It was something slower than that. The stillness of a person who has just seen the shape of a thing they had been not seeing and who is taking a moment to accommodate the new information alongside the old. "I didn't know," she said. Her voice was even. "I want you to know that." He looked at her carefully. Patricia's word nothing direct was still in him. He had turned it over many times in the past weeks, held it at different angles, tested it for accuracy. He believed it. He believed her. "I know," he said. She let out a breath that had been in her a long time. She started and then stopped. Tried again. "I thought he was just." She stopped again. Shook her head. "I don't know what I thought." "I know," Marcus said again. They were quiet. The cafe moved around them, 2 students with laptops, an old man with a newspaper, a woman trying to keep a toddler from destroying a sugar dispenser. "Marcus," Elena said, "I am sorry, not for the investigation. I understand what's happening with that, and it isn't about me. I mean, I'm sorry for the other thing, for the way it happened, for the way it happened, for the—" She lifted her hands. "For the dishonesty of it, the duration of the dishonesty." He had wondered in the months since March whether this apology, if it came, would do something for him, give him something, or release something. He had wondered whether he needed it. He found sitting across from her in the October warmth of an ordinary cafe that he did not need it, but that he was glad to have it. It was real. She was not performing the apology, she was making it, which was different, and he knew the difference. "Thank you," he said. The same 2 words he had said to her in March, in their living room, with Victor standing there. But the weight of them was different now. She looked at him. Something in her face shifted, not toward hope, not toward reconciliation, but toward a kind of clear-eyed sadness. The grief of seeing something accurately for the first time. "You're a better person than I gave you credit for," she said quietly. "I don't mean that as a compliment, exactly. I mean, I think I needed to believe something specific about you to make what I did make sense, and I don't think that thing was entirely true." He considered this. "I think I needed to believe something specific about myself," he said, "and I don't think that was entirely true either." They sat with this. Outside, a cloud shifted, and a weak October sun fell through the window for a moment and lit the table between them, their coffee cups, her hands, the space that had always been between them and always would be. "The authorities will need a statement from you," he said. "My attorney will be in contact. You're not in trouble. They understand your situation." She nodded. He looked at her one more time. He was memorizing something, not her face, which he already knew too well. But the particular quality of this moment, this ending that did not announce itself as an ending because real endings almost never do. They arrive looking like Tuesday mornings in October, like ordinary coffee in an ordinary cafe, like two people who loved each other once and built something together that did not hold, and who are now at last being honest with each other in the only way left available, quietly, without audience, too late. He left money on the table for both drinks. He put on his coat. "Take care of yourself, Elena." She looked up. Her eyes were dry, but only just. "You too," she said. And then, after a moment, softer, "Marcus, I hope you find someone who deserves." She stopped, shook her head. "I hope you find something good." He almost said something. He held it, let it go. He walked out into the gray October morning, past the fogged windows, past the toddler with the sugar dispenser, out through the glass door into the cold where the air smelled like eucalyptus and distant rain. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just stood. Then he put his hands in his pockets and walked in the direction of the water, which was only 4 blocks away. And he walked there and he looked at it for a long time flat, silver, enormous, entirely indifferent to what had just ended and felt. Not happiness exactly, but the particular quality of a person who has put something down that they carried for too long, and whose arms are still learning the unfamiliar, bewildering lightness of being empty. Somewhere behind him, the city went on. He stood at the edge of it and breathed, and did not yet know what came next. That not knowing, for the first time in years, felt less like failure. It felt almost like beginning.